So this is my new book, Under the Wild Sky, set in Ireland between 1901 and 1920. And I'm going to read the piece where one of the principal characters, Guy Forrester, goes back to his place in France when the war was over. December 1918. When the war was over, Guy went back to Fontibel. It was an arduous journey. In northern France, the railways had been bombed, the roads potholed from shelling. The countryside, blasted by 4 years of conflict, was forlorn. The atmosphere that hovered over every blood-drenched field and ditch was a visceral silence, a mourning beyond sadness that tainted the air and seeped into the soul. He went to Fontibel for Christmas. He returned alone, driving from Paris in an old Hispano-Suiza, bypassing Bordeaux and hurrying south to where the great forests of the Landes came to meet him. He slowed to savour the long straight roads between the great maritime pines, the stillness, the emptiness. It was a winter afternoon with long shafts of light among the trees. Here and there in forest clearings were the old half-timbered hamlets, surrounded by their flocks of hens and ducks. People in clogs and homespun clothes paused to gaze at the passing motor. You might assume they were untouched, he thought, until you looked around for the young man. He had sent a wire to the Fargs to prepare the house. The gates were open, the lavender avenue, winter grey. He turned into the gateway and stopped. To left and right of him were trees, separated by alleys of wet grass, all dim with the approach of night. A young stag shot suddenly from the wood and was lost again in the twilight. He passed the little Maison de Gardienne, empty and shuttered, and then the avenue broadened into a forecourt, and the house was before him, the gentle Fontibel manor. The front windows were bright. He had told the Fargs he wanted open shutters and candlelit windows for his homecoming. And in the gathering dusk the house looked as though it were awaiting guests. But many of the guests it had once entertained were now ghosts. He could see them, shadowy wraiths waiting for him by the worn sandstone steps to the hall door. There was Belling and Dixon and Henderson, old friends, laughing together as they had on that last boar hunt before the war. The guilt seized him by the throat. Why them? Why not him? The front door opened and Jeanette's sturdy figure was framed against the lighted hall. She came onto the steps, followed by her husband. Guy stopped the car and alighted. Stiff and cold, he came towards them and took their hands. They kissed him on both cheeks, pressed his hands as if to assure themselves he was real. Bienvenue, monsieur. Jeanette's eyes were wet. Je suis ravie de vous revoir, Guy said, telling them how glad he was to see them, and fighting the desire to weep. Monsieur est fatigué, Jeanette whispered, wiping her eyes and asking him immediately if he was hungry, with the eagerness of someone who had spent the day cooking. Guy realized that he was hungry, and followed his housekeeper indoors, crossing the tiles slowly, noting the armoire normande, the cupboard used for coats, and the Aubusson tapestry that had always been there. They gave off the perfume of his youth. Il y a un feu dans la bibliothèque, Jeanette said. Guy smiled at her. A fire in the library, like old times. She bustled away to the kitchen, and he went to the lamplit library, where a log fire blazed in the old marble fireplace. The room was warm and close. The fire must have been going all day. He shivered in the heat and looked around at the books on their shelves. He had taken time to put them in order. Literary books, military books, French books. Long ago, before the world had flipped. He sat on a Louis XVI canapé before the fire, longing to sleep, but incapable of slumber. Belling, Dixon and Henderson hovered by the fire. They were joined by Harry Healy, who looked at him with his old mischievous grin. Guy put his hands over his eyes. He began to sob. Pierre Farr came to the door. He began to say the bags had been put in Monsieur's bedroom, but he heard the wrenching sounds as he crossed the threshold and withdrew, soundlessly, wiping his eyes. The morning came reluctantly. The night had been cold, despite the embers glowing in the bedroom fireplace. Guy had hardly slept. His dreams had propelled him constantly into the relative calm of insomnia. He had been glad of the glow from the embers in the grate and the glimmer under his door of the lamp in the landing. But nonetheless, the shadows of yesterday had thickened, clustering about him. The silence was the stillness of the armistice, the eloquence of silenced guns. At 8 a.m. he got out of bed, opened one of the 2 windows and threw back the shutters. The parkland round the house was covered by a freezing mist. A few birds chirped. 2 deer grazed near the lake. Carpets of dead leaves brightened the ground with red and ochre. From the village came the tolling of the mass bell. He went back to bed. I will let in the peace. It will save me. He reached for the locket around his neck, in which he kept a thin twist of light brown hair. It had been his talisman during the last 2 years, replacing the little ring he had been unable to find in Dougie's rooms, although he had hunted for it high and low. When Jeanette came to inquire if Monsieur would like a breakfast tray in his room, she found him fast asleep. She shut the window quietly, tended the fire, and went away.